Hello, friends. My name is Nora, and I am the Director of Heritage and Interpretation at the Institute of Southern Jewish Life in Jackson, Mississippi. Welcome to the ISJL Virtual Vacation, a video series that explores and celebrates the history and culture of the Jewish South. This episode is geared toward younger viewers, specifically 3rd through 5th graders, but I hope that there is something here for kids of all ages. In this episode, we're talking about a subject that's near and dear to my heart, immigration. It's a big topic, so we're going to focus on the history of European Jewish immigration to the South. It's something I never learned about in school, and so learning about the experiences of Jewish immigrants in this region has taught me a lot about the South, about the experience of adapting to a new culture, and about what it means to be American. There are a few things I hope you'll take away from our time together today. Immigration means moving to another country to live there permanently. Starting in the mid-18th century, Jewish immigrants left their homes in Europe and came to America in search of economic opportunity and religious and civic freedoms. Many Southern immigrants soon became peddlers and began to get accustomed to American culture while traveling through the South. Contemporary American immigration has many parallels with historic Jewish immigration. Immigrants still come to the United States and face incredible odds to build better lives for themselves and their families. Every person's immigration experience is different. And finally, it's important for Americans to welcome immigrants to our country. Before we begin, a special note for parents and caregivers. If you'd like to make sure this episode is as interactive as possible, head to the ISJL Virtual Vacation website to download and print the Southern Jewish Immigration Workbook. Several times during the episode, I'll ask you to pause the video to complete a task in the workbook, so it will be helpful to have it handy, along with something to write with. Pause the video now to print the workbook and grab a pen or pencil if you'd like. All right, we're back. It's easy to think about immigrants as one big category, and to talk about waves of immigration to the United States in broad strokes. European immigrants came from many different countries, had many different backgrounds, and traveled to many different places in the United States. Immigrants came from France, Spain, Russia, Scandinavia, England, Ireland, and other European countries. They moved all over the US, to states including New York, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Virginia, and Mississippi. But today we're going to focus on just one person, one imaginary person, and imagine her family's specific experience of leaving their home in Europe and traveling to the United States in the 1800s, the 19th century. Everybody say hello to Esther. Esther is 14 years old. She has a younger sister named Goldie and a younger brother named Lev. She is from Baden in southwestern Germany. Let's take a look at a map. This is a map of Germany with Baden circled in the corner. Here is where Germany is on the continent of Europe. And here is where Germany and Europe are on a map of the world. Esther and her family live in a small town on the Rhine River, where they work in the retail business. Esther enjoys helping her mom Miriam at the store where she works, and playing with her younger sister Goldie and her little brother Lev. The year is 1868, and Frederick, the Grand Duke of Baden, just appointed Moritz Eltstatter as his Minister of Finance, making him the first German Jew to hold such a position. Decades of political turmoil have meant that the rights and freedoms of Jews change constantly, and Jews can't hold the same jobs as their Christian neighbors. Esther and her family experience daily discrimination. It's getting harder and harder to be Jewish in Germany. A couple of years ago, Esther's dad, Abraham, left Germany to move to America. He wanted to move somewhere where he could find work and explore the American countryside. Because he was from a small town in Germany, he didn't want to move to a big city like New York. A few years ago, a friend of his moved to Texas, so he decided to travel there. Now he's working as a peddler in Texas, and he has been saving money to bring the rest of his family to America. Abraham just sent a letter to Esther's mom, Miriam, letting her know that it's finally time for the family to move to the United States. Esther is nervous about moving to another country where she doesn't know anyone or speak the language, but she is excited about a new adventure, and she's especially excited to see her father again. What do you think is the hardest part of moving to a new country? What's the most exciting part? Pause the video and take a few minutes to answer on the first page of your workbook. I think that the hardest part of moving to a new country would be saying goodbye to friends and family at home. I think the most exciting part of moving to a new country would be learning about a new culture. Esther probably feels the same way, but Esther and her family have a long way to go before they arrive in Texas. Today, in 2021, it's pretty easy to travel around the world. Even though plane tickets are expensive, it's possible to go from one side of the world to another in a day or less. In the 19th century, traveling across the Atlantic Ocean was a big deal. It was expensive and it took several weeks, and most immigrants could only afford to take the trip once. That's the case for Esther and her family. They know that they won't see Baden again. That's a pretty scary prospect, huh? Esther's family and thousands of other immigrants could only bring a small bag and the clothes on their backs when they moved to a new place. We know that immigration means moving to another country to live there permanently, so we know that Esther and her family members probably wanted to bring some special things with them to America. I want to show you some objects that Jewish immigrants might have brought with them to the United States. Faith was a really important thing for immigrants of all backgrounds, so they often brought things that were important for their religion and heritage. You might recognize some of these objects from your home or your synagogue. Here's a fun game. I'll describe the object and then you guess what it is. Maybe Esther's family packed this object in their bags. It's a candelabra with 9 branches used to celebrate Hanukkah, the festival of lights. Pause the video to guess what it is. That's right. It's a menorah. This object is the Holy Book of Judaism, handwritten on a scroll in Hebrew. Jews read a section of this book each week, completing the reading by the end of the year. Pause the video to guess what it is. That's right, a Torah. Now, this miniature Torah is very cute, but typically Torahs are pretty large. Many families had a family Bible, like this one, that they would have brought across the ocean instead. This pair of objects holds the candles lit on Friday evening to welcome Shabbat, or the Sabbath. Pause the video to guess what they are. That's right, Shabbat candlesticks. This object is the plate used to hold and display the traditional foods of Passover. Can you pause the video and guess what it is? That's right, a Seder plate. This object is a prayer shawl worn by some Jews during religious services, some holidays, and some life cycle events. Pause the video and guess what it is. You got it, it's a talit or talis. Finally, this object is the horn of a ram that is fashioned into an instrument, much like a trumpet. It's blown on Rosh Hashanah and often on Yom Kippur. Pause the video and guess what it is. That's right, a shofar. Now, immigrants didn't just bring religious objects. They brought a combination of things that were important for their faith and things that were important for their survival. Things like clothing, books, cooking and sewing equipment, and toys. They didn't know what they would be able to find in America. You might have objects like these that members of your family brought with them to America, or you might have objects like these that have been passed down from generation to generation. There might be items you have in your home now that maybe aren't family heirlooms, but that you might like to pass on to friends or family in the future. Now, we need to help Esther pack her bag for the journey to America. Take a look at the front page of your workbooks and think about what you might bring if you move to a new country. You might bring something that's really practical, or you might bring something that's really special to you and your family that you wouldn't want to leave behind. Pause the video again and look at the bottom of the first page of your workbook. Write down what you would bring with you if you moved to a new country. Welcome back! I'm sure you wrote down lots of meaningful, fun, and practical things to bring with you. There are a few things that I would definitely bring to a new country that I'd like to share with you. I would definitely bring my favorite book, This family photograph and this pan, it belonged to my mom when she was my age, and I have baked cakes in it for my entire life. Even though we live over 150 years after Esther immigrated to America, I bet that a lot of the objects we would bring with us are pretty similar. For example, Esther's family probably brought some reminders of family and friends back home, and there's a good chance that they brought some kind of cooking equipment with them as well. Next, we're going to learn about what it was like to travel to America. While I'm telling you about it, I want us to imagine what it was like for Esther and her family to make this journey. Before I tell you, I want you to turn to the second page of your workbooks and write down what you think the journey will be like for Esther. How long do you think it will take? What kind of vehicle will Esther take to get to America? Pause the video to write your answers. We're back! Now that you've written down some guesses about Esther's journey, we're going to learn about it. As I go, write what you learned on the bottom of the second page of your workbook, especially if it's different from your guesses. Very few individuals had the money to pay for passage to America in the 19th century. There are stories of entire villages saving up enough money for one person to be able to immigrate. With the ticket came the hope that the person selected would be able to make a living in America and use their resources to pay for passage for the rest of their family. That's what Esther's dad Abraham is doing. There were some people who became prosperous and were able to send for their loved ones. There were also those who never saw their families again. Immigrants in the past did not have cars. This means that most of the time, immigrants had to walk or ride in a wagon for hundreds of miles through Europe just to get to the dock where the ship was. Before 1850, immigrants traveled on sail ships, meaning that the journey across the Atlantic could take up to 6 months. The companies and individuals who owned these ships packed lower-class immigrants into steerage. Steerage refers to the lower decks, often below the water level, that were very cheap and had very minimal accommodations. Steerage passengers had to provide their own bedding, clean their own bunks, and bring their own food to cook for each meal. Only space and water were provided with a steerage ticket. After 1850, steamships became the norm, and the transatlantic journey was reduced to approximately 2 to 3 weeks. Esther and her family immigrated in 1868, so they took a steamship to Texas. However, conditions for steerage passengers were still really bad. They were packed together with hardly any room to stand or sleep. Here's a map of the world again, with Germany highlighted. Can you spot Texas? To get to Texas, Esther and her family had to first travel 475 miles on foot and by horse-drawn cart to Hamburg, where they met the steamship that took them to America. Walking that distance would take 3 weeks or more. They might have been able to take a train for part of the journey, but that would have been very expensive. Once they arrived in Hamburg, they had to wait for their ship to arrive and then board it with hundreds of other passengers. The journey on a ship from Hamburg to Galveston is about 6,400 miles. Hamburg was a very important port for European immigrants. Between 1830 and 1914, more than 4 million people left Europe through Hamburg. Unfortunately, some immigrants did not survive the journey. It was really easy to get sick on unsanitary ships. The ones who made it to America, like Esther and her family, had a new life to start. Let's find out what happened to them. Esther and her family just arrived in Galveston, where Esther's father Abraham was there to meet them. Can you imagine what a wonderful reunion that was after years spent apart? Abraham, Esther's dad, just got a job at a clothing store in Houston, Texas. His boss is another Jewish immigrant who Abraham met at Beth Israel, the first Jewish congregation in Texas. While Esther, Miriam, Goldie, and Lev get settled into their new life in Houston, let's talk about how Abraham got here. We know that he traveled to America by himself 2 years ago, in 1866, in search of new opportunities and a new life for his family. For those 2 years, Abraham worked as a peddler. Do you know what a peddler is? A peddler is a person who travels from place to place, selling household goods and other products. Peddlers were essentially a type of salesperson. They often carried heavy sacks with them, filled with goods that were in high demand for rural families. These men would walk from town to town, from house to house, and sell their goods to individual households. Pause the video now and turn to page 3 of your workbook. Write down the definition of the word peddler. All right, we're back. The profession of peddling originated in Europe, where Jews often could not live within city limits or did not have the money to own their own stores. Jews made the most of their circumstances and became self-employed. Because the South was very agrarian, meaning it had many farms, it had fewer general stores and had large amounts of space between settlements. Many Jewish immigrants took up peddling as their initial profession. Peddlers would only carry the goods they knew they could sell to rural families. What types of items do you think peddlers sold? What would you need if you lived in the past and lived far from a store? Pause the video and write your answer on the 3rd page of your workbook. Now that you've guessed some of the items that peddlers might have sold, let's take a look. A lot of these items will probably be familiar to you. Remember when I had you guess the types of items that immigrants brought with them to America? We're going to do the same thing now. I'll describe the item that peddlers sold, and then you guess what it is. Maybe Abraham sold this item from his pack. It's an expensive accessory and hard to find outside of a specialty store in a town. This item was profitable for peddlers, as rural communities often lacked access to these luxuries. Pause the video and guess what this item is. That's right, it's jewelry. This next item is used for sewing and weaving. Many people used to make their own clothes during the 19th century, and they might have only owned 2 or 3 outfits. That means that they had to take care of their clothes and do their own repairs and alterations. Pause the video and guess what this item is. That's right, it's thread. This sweet item was plentiful in the United States, but it was only produced on plantations in the Caribbean. Unlike flour, cotton, wheat, and other items, Americans could not make this item themselves. Pause the video and guess what it is. That's right, it's sugar. This last item was really valuable. Not very many people lived near a hospital or a doctor's office in the 19th century. People were lucky if they could get a doctor to come see them in 3 days' time. It was important for families to have this item on hand in case someone got sick. Pause the video and guess what it is. Yes, it's medicine. So many Jews took up peddling that it actually helped unify Jews from many European countries. With so many immigrants taking up the peddler's trade, a connection began to form between small Jewish communities throughout the South. The profession also helped Jews assimilate into American culture. Peddling required one-on-one contact and conversation. A peddler had to learn the language, preferences, and personalities of his customers. But Esther's dad, Abraham, isn't a peddler anymore. Now Esther and her family live in Houston, Texas, and her father works in a clothing store. In Houston, the Jewish community has grown immensely, even since Abraham arrived a few years ago. In 1870, just 2 years after Esther came to America, Beth Israel congregation moved into a brand new brick building in Houston, and the cornerstone laying ceremony was attended by people from all over the city. The community welcomed Jews like Esther and her family, and the city's Jewish population continued to grow. Esther is excited to get to know the other kids in her neighborhood, explore her new city, and attend services at her new synagogue. She is looking forward to learning more about the clothing business from her dad and getting involved in her community. Pause the video now and look at the 3rd page of your workbook. Answer the question at the bottom of the page. If you owned a store in Esther's time, what would you sell? What about if you owned a store now? The adjustment is going to be hard for Esther and her family, but she's optimistic. Jews are active in her community, and there are lots of opportunities for her to live a vibrant and exciting life. Immigrants like Esther are still making difficult journeys to America today. They come from all over the world, and they all have their own unique stories. We have focused on Jewish immigrants, but immigrants come from all backgrounds and faith traditions. For a long time, people who have lived in and moved to America have written about their experiences. As we learned throughout this lesson, America is a nation of immigrants. You likely have ancestors, family, and friends from all over the world. It's part of what makes us unique. Our diversity is our strength. I want to share some poems with you that tell us a little bit more about the experiences of our immigrant family members, friends, and neighbors. As I read, follow along in your workbooks and think about the answers to these questions. What are the feelings in the poem? What's the poet trying to make us feel? What happens in the poem? What words or phrases jump out at you? Are there any other words or phrases you do not understand? How are the words spaced out on the page? This first poem is by Emma Lazarus. Emma Lazarus was born in New York City in 1849, a descendant of Portuguese Jews. She was one of the first American Jewish poets to achieve widespread success, and was asked to write a poem about the Statue of Liberty. That poem, The New Colossus, is now displayed on the statue's pedestal. Although Esther and her family sailed to Galveston, Texas, millions of immigrants just like Esther would have seen the Statue of Liberty as they arrived in America through Ellis Island in New York. Follow along with the poem on page 4 of your workbook. The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed, sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. This poem has a lot of complicated language and references in it, so let's talk about what it all means. The first 2 lines of the poem talk about a brazen giant of Greek fame who has limbs astride from land to land. This is a reference to the Colossus of Rhodes, an ancient Greek statue that once stood by the harbor on the island of Rhodes. Some say that the statue stood with one leg on each side of the harbor, so people had to sail under it to enter. The poet, Emma Lazarus, is comparing the Statue of Liberty to the Colossus of Rhodes, and by describing the Statue of Liberty as Mother of Exiles, the poet is showing that the Statue of Liberty is maternal and welcoming to newcomers, while the Colossus of Rhodes was intimidating and maybe even scary. The poet then goes on to describe the Statue of Liberty as a new version of the Colossus of Rhodes, hence the name of the poem. The phrase sunset gates refers to the entrance to New York City. Immigrants sailed west across the Atlantic Ocean, and the sun sets in the west, so they might have seen the sunset over New York as they arrived. In the next lines, the poet describes the Statue of Liberty's torch. It glows worldwide welcome, meaning that the light from the torch is providing a warm welcome to immigrants from all over the world. The air-bridged harbor that Twin Cities frame refers to New York Harbor. The Twin Cities are New York, now Manhattan, and Brooklyn, which at the time the poem was written were 2 separate cities. The second half of the poem is in the voice of the Statue of Liberty herself. She has silent lips because she's a statue and can't actually talk, but the poet imagines what she might say to us if she could. She says, "Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp," which is her way of saying that the old traditions of Europe can stay there, and she would prefer to create some new traditions in America. The last lines of the poem are probably the most famous. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Here, the poet is describing the millions of poor, tired immigrants who were making their way to the United States during the 19th century. In fact, 27 million people immigrated to the United States just between 1880 and 1930. The Statue of Liberty continues, saying, "Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me." The immigrants are the homeless because they have left homes in Europe to find new ones in America. A tempest is a violent storm, so the fact that the immigrants are tempest-tossed means that they have endured long voyages across the stormy ocean. Finally, the poet, in the voice of the Statue of Liberty, says, "I lift my lamp beside the golden door." The Golden Door is imaginary, but it's meant to be a symbol of the freedom and opportunity awaiting these immigrants once they arrive in America. They have to pass through that Golden Door to get to their new home. Now, some of you may have already caught this, but the Statue of Liberty, which is now an iconic symbol of the ideals of American democracy, didn't actually exist when Esther and her family came to the United States in 1868. It was dedicated in 1886, 18 years after Esther arrived in Texas. The new Colossus was written in 1883 to raise funds for the construction of the statue's pedestal, and the poem was displayed inside the pedestal beginning in 1903. Ellis Island, which was for a time the busiest immigration station in the United States, is in many ways synonymous with the Statue of Liberty. But Ellis Island wasn't established as a federal immigration station until the 1890s. Still, this poem has something to tell us about the story of American immigration, and Esther and her family and millions more like them are a part of that story. What do you think Esther and her family had in common with immigrants traveling through Ellis Island? What is the Golden Door next to the Statue of Liberty? What is your favorite part of the poem? Pause the video now and write down what this poem means to you on page 4 of your workbook. Welcome back! I hope that you enjoyed that poem as much as I did. Emma Lazarus, like our friend Esther, lived a long time ago. I think it's important to know that immigrants are still coming to the US and still finding ways to make this place their own. The other poems I'll read you are by immigrants who are still alive and still writing about their experiences. This next poem is by Joseph O. Legazpi, who was born in the Philippines and moved to the United States with his family when he was 12. He lives in New York City, where he founded an organization that supports Asian American writers. I love this poem because it's about what it feels like to be an immigrant, to feel a connection to both the place where you're from and the place where you live now. This poem is called Amphibians. Do you know what an amphibian is? Amphibians are a class of animals, like reptiles or birds. They hatch from eggs and live the first part of their lives in the water, and then they develop lungs that allow them to live on land. Frogs and salamanders are both amphibians. Think about why a person writing about immigration might use an amphibian as a comparison for their experiences. As I read the poem, follow along on page 5 of your workbook. Amphibians by Joseph O. Legazpi. Amphibians live in both. Immigrants leave their land hardening in the sea, out of water. In Greek, amphibian means on both sides of life, terra and aqua, shoreline. In fresh water, amphibians lay shell-less eggs. Immigrants give birth to Americans. Tadpoles, polywogs, metamorphose, gills in early stages. On land, amphibians develop lungs. Immigrants develop lungs. Through damp skin, amphibians oxygenate. Immigrants toil and sleep breathlessly. Skin forms glands. Eyes form eyelids. Amphibians seek land. Immigrants other lands. Their colors brighten, camouflage. They've been known to fall out of the sky, fully at home in the rain. What is an amphibian? What does it mean for an immigrant to be fully at home in the rain? How might immigrating to a new country cause you to grow and change? What is your favorite part of the poem? Pause the video now and write down what this poem means to you on page 5 of your workbook. This last poem is by Shirley Gyoklin Lim, who was born in Malaysia and spoke Malay and Chinese as her first languages. She moved to the United States after college and now lives in California. Follow along with me on page 6 of your workbook. Learning to Love America by Shirley Gyoklin Lim. Because it has no pure products, because the Pacific Ocean sweeps along the coastline, because the water of the ocean is cold, and because land is better than ocean. Because I say we rather than they. Because I live in California, I have eaten fresh artichokes and jacaranda bloom in April and May. Because my senses have caught up with my body, my breath with the air it swallows, my hunger with my mouth. because I walk barefoot in my house, because I have nursed my son at my breast, because he is a strong American boy, because I have seen his eyes redden when he is asked who he is, because he answers, I don't know. Because to have a son is to have a country. Because my son will bury me here. Because countries are in our blood and we bleed them. Because it is late and too late to change my mind. Because it is time. Pause the video one more time and write about what this poem means to you on page 6 of your workbook. What is your favorite part of the poem? Why is the poet torn about loving America? Why is her son sad? Why is it too late to change her mind about loving America? Thank you so much for reading these poems with me. One thing I love about them is that they tell us something about what it means to be American and to be from somewhere, whether it is the United States or somewhere else. Now, we're going to write poems of our own. If you turn to pages 7 and 8 of your workbooks, you'll see I am from written across the top of the page. I want you to brainstorm some images and memories from your life and list them on the page. Follow the prompts on your worksheet. You shouldn't write full sentences, just a word or phrase in response to each prompt. Here are the prompts. Favorite color, favorite story or book, family tradition, favorite food, something you love about your neighborhood, something you like to do with your friends, family memory, a hobby or sport you enjoy, favorite time of year or season, something you like to do outside, something funny, something serious, something you like about yourself, a place you've traveled, where you were born. If you'd like, ask someone else in your house to help you come up with ideas. Pause the video and take a few minutes to write on pages 7 and 8. Welcome back. I hope you have a long list of images on your paper. Some of the sensory images I wrote down are carrot cake, campfires, melting snow, jumping into the ice-cold ocean, dodging potholes on my bicycle, and late-night dance parties. Now we're going to turn those ideas into a poem on pages 9 and 10 of your workbooks. Every line of the poem is going to start with the phrase, I am from, and end with one of those images you brainstormed. You can put them in any order and add other ideas as you go. If you'd like, ask someone else in your house to help you come up with your finished poem. For example, using the sensory images I brainstormed, my poem goes something like this. I am from Aunt Vanjie's carrot cake. I am from long hikes in Maine. I am from jumping into the ocean. I am from card games. I am from the smell of campfires. I am from bicycles. I am from potholes. I am from dance parties. I am from winter melting into spring. Using the list of images and memories you created on pages 7 and 8, fill in the blanks on pages 9 and 10 of your workbook to make your very own I am from poem. Feel free to add more images and memories to the poem as you write. Pause the video for a few minutes to do that. We're back! I hope that you enjoyed writing your poem. I bet that it is a wonderful reflection of who you are and the people and places and stories that matter to you. I hope that during our time together today, you learned something new about what it means to be an immigrant and how challenging and exciting it can be to move somewhere new. Have you ever gone to a place that you have never been to before? Was that easy or hard for you? Why? What challenges do you think Esther and her family faced that immigrants are also facing today? Pause the video and turn to page 11 in your workbook to answer these questions. In the South, in Esther's time, Jews from Europe were generally welcomed and accepted. Jews immigrating to other parts of the United States often faced challenges because of discrimination. Immigrants from other parts of the world also experienced prejudice. That's still true today. Today, immigrants have to face many of the same obstacles that Esther and her family faced, including learning a new language, finding a place to live, getting a job to support their family, making new friends, going to a new school, going to a new house of worship, getting medical care, eating different foods, wearing different clothes, leaving things they love behind, learning about a new culture, and finding ways to celebrate their culture in a new place. As Americans, we can learn about and remember stories of immigrants, and we can work to make sure that we welcome all immigrants from around the world with open arms. Do you have any friends or family members who have immigrated to the United States? What have you done to make them feel welcome? If you've never met a person who immigrated to America, what could you do to make them feel like they belong here? Pause the video and answer these questions on page 12 of your workbook. So what did we learn today on our journey with Esther? We learned that immigration means moving to another country to live there permanently. Starting in the mid-18th century, Jewish immigrants left their homes in Europe and came to America in search of economic opportunity and religious and civic freedoms. Many Southern immigrants soon became peddlers and began to get accustomed to American culture while traveling through the South. Contemporary American immigration has many parallels with historic Jewish immigration. Immigrants still come to the United States and face incredible odds to build better lives for themselves and their families. Every person's immigration experience is different. It's important for Americans to welcome immigrants to our country. Pause the video one last time to turn to page 13 of your workbook. Take a few minutes to reflect on what you learned today. What was your favorite part of our time together today? What is one thing that surprised you? What questions do you have for Esther? Take your time. I'll be right here when you're done. Welcome back! If you enjoyed our time together today, please let me know. Parents and caregivers, please feel free to get in touch with me at heritage@isjl.org. If you feel comfortable sharing your poems with us, we would absolutely love to read them and share them with the ISJL community. I would love to continue to produce ISJL virtual vacation episodes for kids, so please let me know if you enjoyed this one and if there are any other topics you'd like to see for this age group. If you're new to the ISJL virtual vacation, welcome! This monthly series is typically geared toward adults, but we're always finding ways to expand our audience and engage viewers of all ages in the history and culture of the Jewish South. There's lots more to explore on our website, including all of our past episodes. You can also sign up for our mailing list to be the first to hear about new ISJL virtual vacation episodes and to receive additional resources to enrich your experience of our episodes. Next month, the ISJL virtual vacation goes musical. That's right, we're talking all about Jews and country music. We'll talk about the connections between Jews and country and bluegrass, and you can expect a surprise musical guest to stop by. You absolutely don't want to miss this one. Friends, thank you so much for joining Esther and me today. We'll see you next time.